My name is RikkeLykke. I am heading the Nordic region for PATRIZIA Immobilien AG, a stock-listed investment house in Europe. We are invested in almost all asset classes. Recently, we joined forces with Triova and Rockspring, so we are now a 40 billion euro company with, well, we have 40 billion euros of assets under management in Europe. And we have platforms all over Europe, so we have local people on site.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yep. Altera invests on behalf of pension funds and insurance companies in residential, retail, and light industrial. We focus on residential in the urban areas, including student housing, but on a variety of topics. We do outperform the benchmark, and we are the best in the GRESB benchmark score, to give you a bit of a flavor. And this is our running topics in our strategy.
Great.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mahdi Mokrane. I head the strategy and research at LaSalle Investment Management for Europe. LaSalle is just short of 60 billion euros of assets under management globally through securities, but also direct investments. About 20 billion in Europe, and a significant portion in the main food groups, you know, the office, retail, logistics, but what we call the bed strategy, and we'll come back to that for us, is in which has student housing, but also residential, service departments, etc., as well as hotels, is a key component of our strategy. And of course, we do outperform like everyone else.
Great. Horst.
Hello, everybody. My name is Horst. I'm one of the founders and CEO of International Campus AG, based in Munich. We are focusing on student housing and housing of young professionals as core products. We are active in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Austria, and nowadays in Prague, and tomorrow in Budapest as well. Specialist, a fully integrated platform. We are raising funds, we are managing funds. We are developing, we are investing, and last but not least, we are operators.
Great, and also there was the deal with Brookfield recently.
Yes, I didn't mention that to give you the chance to ask for that. So most of you know, after nearly 1 year, initial talks started last year at MIPIM. We are happy to welcome Brookfield as our new main shareholder in IC Group. We decided, my co-shareholders and me, to look for somebody who is willing, motivated, and with the right ammunition on board to make IC Group to a sustainable business and to one of the leading players on continental Europe.
Very good. Rainer.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rainer Nonnengässer. Within MPC Capital, I'm heading the micro-living / PBSA platform, which is also an integrated platform like IC. We do development and operations. In Germany, under our core brand, Stay 2, we currently run some 1,500 units. And since last year, we're also looking into Spain and Portugal.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we don't have time to introduce everybody here, so we'll just have to get to know one another afterwards or during the event. Let's start. Intrigued to hear more about your view, Mahdi, there on beds. That's a strategy overall, rather than looking at particular niches, whether it's micro-living, whether it's student housing or resi. So how does that strategy work, and is that a global strategy, and is that also in place in Europe?
I think when you manage capital on behalf of institutional investors, a number of criteria sort of come, straight to mind. First of all, is it an established asset class? And I think, Samuel, you mentioned, getting benchmark statistics, data, transparency, maturing asset class. So, some countries have main food groups such as, office, retail, and as you move into what the Americans would call niche property types, then you get interesting features. One of the key interesting features, I think you mentioned it, operators. Operators, how do you actually operate the assets? And we put changing lifestyles into one big bucket that is happening throughout the world. And this is mobility. It's also the fact that cities are growing. And you have one key aspect that I don't think has been mentioned yet, which is affordability. And affordability is key. So we put the bed strategy or changing lifestyle strategy at the heart of our expanding into this space. This is student housing, but it's also service departments, it's hotels, and residential. And we'll talk maybe about residential in this space. So what, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to do within our group is understand how that fits portfolios for our clients that want to have a diversified portfolio. What role does student housing have to play in a diversified portfolio? What role has residential in different parts of Europe? So on a risk-adjusted basis, because one of the things we also look very keenly at is the operational cost and the way, the distance between what a student pays and what ultimately an investor collects in terms of net cash flows.
Okay, good. I wanted to pick up just a couple of the more kind of general trends following on from your presentation, Samuel. Rikke, in terms of the PATRIZIA view, residential as a real estate sector continues to grow and be more institutional as an investment class. What do you think are the key drivers for that? Because we've seen huge growth in that. Is that following on from a US model, or do you think there's something else happening in Europe in terms of it becoming a more investable area?
Residential? I think,
Pan-European.
honestly, I think we just got a little bit more tuned into the residential sector. I don't think, if you look at it from a perspective of, just take the Nordics. Residential has been a huge investment opportunity for the local pension funds for a long time. I think we're just getting, from an international perspective, and also for the German perspective, it's been an asset class for a long time. I think we're just getting to know and getting familiarized with it, and we spent some time doing that, and now we're here. I don't think there's anything in particular, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody wanted hotels, and then people didn't want hotels, and now we're going back to hotels again. I think we're just going where we see the opportunities. Honestly, I don't think there's big science to it. I think what does happen at the moment in some countries is that you have urbanization trends going on. So of course it's interesting for an investor to look into residential when you have urbanization trend going on, to acquire residential, and then later on sell them again. Sometimes we're doing it too theoretical, and it's just we're going where the money is for our investors. It's sorry guys, but it's not that difficult. I actually think when you think about something but student housing, there's one thing that's not been mentioned up here, and that's culture. I looked at your numbers, and I'm sorry to say I haven't read your report yet, but I will. Because I was standing there thinking, okay, there is a huge difference south of Europe to north of Europe. In the Nordics, for example, if you turn 18 and you're starting at the university, I can tell you one thing, all you want to do is get the hell out of home. So you want to find a place to live. And actually you are paid to study. A student that comes to Denmark to study will get 800 to 900 euros a month just because you study. That's enough normally to get yourself a little apartment. Now, that worked for me at that point, also because the university cities, you have to travel to these university cities, and I know a lot of people, even though their parents live in the same city, they want to get their own place. That's how it is. I think it's a little bit different in Italy and in Spain. But in the Nordics, that's what people want to do. So they need to find the places. What's happened over the last few years, 10 years, 15 years, is we didn't build enough residential for the people who does have a work, but we started now building. We have a demand, big demand for resi. Then the local plans came out, and we started building bigger units. So we are building units now of about 90 square meters as an average. Now, if you're a student, you can't pay that. We didn't focus on building student housing accommodation. We focused on building residential accommodation for families or young couples. So now we have a big demand from students because they can't afford the big apartments that's being built. So what they try and do is get together 3 or 4 people to try and live in one of these.
You were saying they can share.
That's what they do. But as an investor, you're not too keen on having students in, 4 young students just getting out of home in an apartment block where you have only couples living with small children. So it's difficult for them.
Are you sure this isn't more about your own university experience?
No. Show me the person in here who hasn't been partying while they were studying. But it's something you have to consider. And also, on paper, they can't actually pay the rent. So do you take that risk on behalf of your investors? You tend not to. So they have a problem. And we have that problem in the Nordics. And we have it to such a degree that actually the universities now, if you are willing to build for them, which we are doing right now in Copenhagen, they will take the entire block and actually rent the entire block as a commercial, on a commercial contract, and they will deal with all the wear and tear, and they will deal with the subletting and everything. So for us, suddenly, that's a pretty good game. The only thing is you have to figure out how do you use it afterwards, and then there's the whole wear and tear thing about people moving in and out. So your operational cost is a little bit higher if it's a normal residential building, which also needs to be taken into consideration. But going back to it, I think there's a cultural aspect here that we need to consider in student housing as well.
I mean, how do you see that, Rainer, in terms of, because obviously you're operating in Germany, but what's your sense of that in terms of culture? How does that change? And have you developed a product that particularly fits with specific cultures?
The thing is, yes, culture is one element. The other thing is you have, let's say, traditional market systematics. Then you have regulatory requirements. So there is no European product, and there is no. It's the same with residential. What is residential? BTR in the UK looks completely different from multifamily stock in Germany. Yeah, so there's no homogeneous name tags on it. And I think the idea is, or if you want to go cross-border, and I think that's the same with you, Horst, you need to adapt your product to the requirements of the relevant markets. So in Germany, for example, we do traditional resi models. We also do commercial models, which also implies some structural differences. But if you look, for example, into Spain and Portugal, where the academic year is only 9 or 10 months, where you have to face summer occupancy topics for the remaining part of the year, and there you need to have, let's say, a setup which embraces these situations, because otherwise you're stuck with significant summer voids, yeah? And that also implies then where to go. What is the perfect location, taking into consideration your requirements for summer, your requirements for the academic year, and you need to balance this. So it would be too easy to say, well, what we do in Germany is perfect, and we roll that out to the rest of Europe. That won't fly.
And in terms of the Dutch market, yeah, what are you seeing there? Is it different to these others? Do you see different opportunities there?
Yeah, well, I agree on the cultural background. That's different. And also the fact that residential, in a wider theme, has been an investor market in the Netherlands for over 50 to 60 years. So there's a different stance to the residential market. We look at student housing, and we also take into account the urbanization and the demographics. So we kind of like mixed-use buildings, where a student can remain a tenant once he finishes his studies. And maybe, talking about your study days, 2 people might meet, and we might break out the apartment, the small, tiny apartment, to one bigger apartment. That's fine. So basically, the strategy in the Dutch market is we look at the universities, they're city-based. There's a huge mismatch in the marketplace between demand and supply, not only on student housing, but also on regular residential. And we do not favor student housing, but we try to solve 2 problems at the same time. Normal housing, for normal people you could say, and student housing included. And it was mentioned just early in the conversation, we do have concepts with sharing the apartments. that's the best way to go about it.
Okay, good. And Horst, you're obviously now with Brookfield as a partner, presumably looking to expand across into different areas, and you're already in quite a number. So I guess, what are the drivers that you're looking at? You're obviously looking at university cities, but are you looking at other drivers like infrastructure, like growing urbanization in these particular cities? What are the sort of key aspects that you look for when you're thinking about investing?
Richard, we will focus on the biggest market in continental Europe, that's Germany. We have 2.8 million students. We have a working economy which produces employers and the need to employ people. So we have a market which is totally under pressure with regard of small units. You mentioned that in a different context. So there is not only competition from student sides, from young professionals, there are commuters in cities like Frankfurt. Everybody's looking for something which is nowadays addressed or taught as micro-living, micro-apartments. And there are commercial products at that end called service apartment. We in Germany call it boarding house, which is misleading in English-speaking word. So that's by far, I think, the biggest market, and we are focusing on our core products. That means student, housing, accommodation under our brand, and for young professionals as well. And in terms of target cities, we are here domestic in Germany, not here, but in Germany. We are in the Big Five invested. Nobody has to explain the economics of the Big Five or Big Seven cities in Germany to international capital. And then we are focusing on the, let's say, 10 to 15 best reputed university cities where people has been studying for hundreds of years or generations-wise. That's how we see it in our domestic market. In Germany, we are part of the Resi market, so that means as a people of talent, we used to manage that situation. In other countries like Austria or wherever, we have commercial versions of Resi, which are unknown in our market. We are reacting. The international expansion, we are targeting on those cities where we feel these cities are attractive for the youth, the mobile youth traveling, being motivated to spend some time, 1 to 2 years, in cities like Prague, like Budapest, like Vienna, and some other target cities we have in mind when we are doing our research. In all cases, it's necessary that we have a domestic basis of, let's say, 50% being in a position to afford the rents for such accommodation as well. The internationals are something coming on top. And in all our houses, we want to create, install, and make community living as an experience. That's starting with the functional design of the buildings, and that's ending by the initiative of our house managers bringing the core of the customers in that building into a community situation. That's how we do that.
Just Mahdi, just coming to you in terms of, because you're obviously looking across all of the sectors. In terms of the research that you're doing, looking at cities, influential cities, are there different markers also, particularly for ones for residential or for student housing or for micro-living, where maybe they would be less attractive for some of the other sectors? Are you looking at that in your analysis and in your strategy for investing in cities?
What's particular about student housing is, it is an emerging asset class in general in Europe. It's been well established in the US. Obviously, when you look at traditional sort of property types, the analysis on cities. We've been running sort of city rankings. We call it the E-Regi for 18 years now, and it's proven to be a good predictor of the sort of the next 3 years of rental growth for offices and retail, etc. Now, there's something specific about student housing. It's in the detail. It's a little bit like a shopping center. You meet, you have parallels with serviced offices. I'm jumping property types, but I see parallels going and evolving in different property types where you have someone that is a community sort of manager in his own or her own right. So it's in the details. So we do have our city preferences. So the same type of ranking. You need higher education. You need productivity, growth in that, or strong human capital. You need the jobs to be there, and you need a sort of strong dynamic and infrastructure. Well, on top of that, we do add rankings, university rankings. For example, in the UK, Cambridge. Cambridge is part of the wider sort of London conurbation, but it's not within it. But we would be happy, and we've invested in Cambridge. But some of the things we add in terms of criteria is whether, as an investor, you're happy with a master lease to university, or you actually go direct let, and then you have an operator that directly lets the apartments to students. In the latter case, if we do go direct, we would go into a very urban, very established locations. If we go outside of that, we would prefer master lease. In general, we have a preference. It's a very specialist business. We've built expertise within our asset management, but it's too specialized to actually, be something we can internalize. We're happy to find an operator for these student halls and student units, and that's across the board in Europe.
Okay, good. Rainer, I wanted to pick up with you. I mean, one of the things that was talked about early in the discussion was affordability, and also Horst mentioned that actually it's key that the students can afford the accommodation. So how does that work in terms of you with your strategy? Is that why micro-living makes more sense? Because actually you can simply fit more places to live in a smaller area. How does that work, or is that just meeting a trend that people actually want smaller spaces?
Yeah, I think the trend that we see is pretty much driven by, one thing is affordability, and the other thing is, let's say, cultural/demographic change. So if you go to Horst's top 10, top 7 cities in Germany, and this is not a German phenomenon, you see that everywhere. You have single-person households at around 60-65%. I think in Frankfurt now we have some 78% of the households without kids. And where does that lead to? We have seen rents rising double digits over the last 4 or 5 years. We're no longer talking about 8 euros per square meter. We're talking about 18 or 28. And if you multiply that with the typical stock in Germany, which is 75 to 90 square meter, you get a different result from multiplying it with 20 or 30. And this is the affordability aspect in it. So everybody is looking for smaller, but not only smaller in general. They're looking for location, they're looking for infrastructure, they're looking for design, they're looking for amenities which fit to the current status within their life cycle. And all these factors merged together lead then to a product which currently embraces the younger part of the tenancy spectrum. We're not into senior living. We are focusing on... Yeah, at some point in time we will also do so, but for the time being, we're focusing on people in education, those people who have their first professional steps, plus commuter. Yeah, we see in continental Europe a very strong trend. No one moves household when he, for job reasons, moves city. Yeah, so there is then a second home requirement given. And all these factors together lead to a very strong sentiment for what we call micro-living. But if you think a little bit out of the box for the next 5-10 years, I think you will see, to a certain extent, the borderline between hospitality and residential disappearing in any kind of, let's say, call it accommodation product for the time being. And you will also see the borderline between office and accommodation meandering. So if you look at WeWork, WeLive, and other products, so I think from now in 5 to 10 years, I don't know how quick it will hit the continent. We will not ask anymore for will student accommodation be an asset class. It will have disappeared as an asset class. It will be absorbed by a product which meets all requirements of certain target groups as regards 24/7. Being where do I live, where do I sleep, where do I work, where do I entertain myself, and these aspects need to be brought into a efficient combination.
Marty, you want to speak that?
Yeah, I just wanted to just add one quick thing on affordability. I think I understood that in Denmark, students or young generation can be paid to go to study. In other countries, they have to borrow.
We are paid a lot of money.
For example, sorry.
We're paid a lot of money.
So one thing we do look at in our portfolio in the UK in particular is with respect to affordability are two things. And I think maybe this is something you could add into the database of student loans and sort of the charge that these students embark as they go into sort of 3 years bachelor or longer. And obviously they will make a sort of economic computation. Is it worth it? And I can only say that we are very conscious, and this is one of our underwriting criteria, to look at affordability also in that sense. And does it make sense to go to that particular university? Do you actually get a pay rise, a significant pay rise or progression in your career, in your prospects, if you go to that university? Hence the rankings that I was mentioning earlier on. Those universities that attract the mobile students around the world have to have great academic credentials, great research, but also the ability to help them find jobs that they can pay the debt off.
Mm. Yeah, you want to speak something up?
Oh, just a quick add note on what Rainer said. I was talking to a group of students and they said, well, we don't need a living room because the city is my living room. And that underpins maybe some cultural changes going on. On the affordability thing, you said, is it worth it? But the next question would be, can I afford it? And what we see today in the market is that also municipalities are stepping in to curb rents in various ways. And I'm okay with that, actually, because if you take affordability very serious, you must provide different type of residential solutions for different target groups. I'm a bit stuck with the target group, this young generation, which are not going to university and starting off their working career with a mediocre, you could say, or middle type of education. They're also in our strategy to build affordable housing for them. And I think that, you have to bring all those target groups together, and I think it's better for a city, the diversity of the city, the inclusion of a city, if you focus on that in your investment strategy. And that really ticks the box with the pension funds also.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I agree, and I disagree with Reiner's normally expect that. And I'm totally convinced that student housing, or better, a specific offer for members of the young generation will be distinguished from other offers and must be distinguished. If you know your customer, all banks and some others are asking for that in a different context. You know what is changing. The generation now is keen to share. They are not willing to possess or to own something if they can have it for a while. They are sharing a lot of things. When I was young and studying, I just want to get for my budget the fastest car I could buy. None of my children are owning cars. They are using them from us or from others if there's a need. So at the end, you can take the essence. That means each generation being under education in a process where they are leaving home but not coming in their own home, establishing a family or whatever. They are traveling. They are commuters, academic commuters, talents. They are hanging around. They need a bed. They need, hopefully, a shower and a toilet, and they need internet access, the best one you can get. And as long as we are believing that we have found the ultimate solution for the perfect product for this client, we will be in dark mid-age in the next 10, 15 years. We have to come and to stay in a dialogue which challenges us to, let's say, to reposition the products we are offering to the generation which is not a static one. They are dynamics.
And do you think, Samuel, just coming to you, we obviously saw in the trends that you'd put through there that laundry was somewhat further down the list than clubbing and cafeteria and various things, which was interesting. But do you think that there's a link between what Horst is saying there, but also that you're increasingly getting more senior retirees moving into the city centres and actually wanting to do very similar things in similar types of accommodation? Do you think this is all beginning to cross over? So rather than Horst's view that you've got to create something individual, that actually a lot of people in society are gradually moving towards this type of living very much in a city?
I would say that the idea that Rainer said is very visionary. I would probably not be, with all respect, as confident as we would. The border can be blurred, but probably will not dismiss, I would say, because the end customer at the end of the day needs to know why to live there. So something that Horst mentioned, that there should be a certain reason and added value and distinguish it from other offers. But what we see from a researcher point of view as a trend based on what's the supply and how the new builds look like and what of the amenities they have out of the list we mentioned, is that they have more and more in the common areas, and they support the community. And as far as what Rainer mentioned, so incubators, the rooms for presentations, so prospective employers are coming to student housing places to hold a presentation over there, or there are offices available. So trend-wise, we already see what Rainer mentioned. Whether this will go as far as the border dismisses, we're going that direction, but probably not as far. I'm not a fortune teller. I'm a researcher.
Can I just have just two very quick words of caution? Or investors traditionally like very clear property types. Why? Simply because as allocators, they sort of say, okay, offices, I sort of understand the dynamics, retail, you know, what's going on with the internet, et cetera, e-commerce, logistics, fine, et cetera. And obviously, the placemaking, the cities, you know, need mixed use. But investors are quite reluctant because it's complicated. So in terms of allocations, you know, if I have 30% retail, you know, 10% offices and a mix of different usages, it's complicated to manage, it's costly, and it's blurred. But it makes total sense. It could make very, very good sense from a placemaking and urban you know, angle. The other thing is, the more amenities you add into a building, the costlier it is as a fixed cost. So at the end of the day, if the market tanks, if maybe, I don't know, going back to the Nordics and Rikke, your example, if suddenly the government stops handing money to youngsters and they have to pay for it themselves, and then the demand dips, or in the UK, university tuition fees double, then you have accidents in your cash flows. Who pays for those amenities? Those are fixed costs as an investor. That's something you have to take into account.
Go ahead, Rikke, you wanted to pick that up.
Yeah, first of all, we don't pay to go to school in the Nordics. It's free, also the universities. We've had this system of getting paid to study for more than 30 years. I don't think it's going to change. There is a political interest in getting more people to study. Actually, they want to increase the youth group that studies from 50% up to 60% for medium to long-term studies. So there is a huge demand and pressure on people to study, actually. It's a benefit we have from our tax scheme in Denmark, that actually all European students from the EU going to Denmark will get the same amount that any Dane will get. So we have a lot of international students for that reason, because they can actually afford coming up because they're getting paid. They have to pay some of it back when they leave. The Danes don't, but they don't pay it back. But anyway, when we come to the affordability, I actually see the list that you sort of set up more as a wish list. I think we all would like to have that. The thing is, who's going to pay for that? And it's something we have to take into consideration, the affordability. Because the students, if they have to borrow the money, they don't want to borrow too much. And yeah, they want all these things, but honestly, they don't want to pay for them. Because somebody needs to clean, somebody needs to make sure everything is correctly done, everything needs to be, there's an operational cost to this that is so high that the students don't want to pay for it. They wish they could have it, but they don't want to pay for it. We tried, they don't want to pay for it. Now, what do you do with such a building afterwards then? So what we actually did in the development we're doing in Copenhagen is we're developing townhouses that can then be used for the next 10 years while we rented them to the university by the students, so they have their little collectives, or what's it called, they live together. And then when we get them back, we can refurbish them and then sell them as townhouses to families. Or we prolong the agreement with the university. For our investors, that's a really good idea. That's a good way, good exit. So that's what we're doing at the moment, and we're looking more into that, because they do want the feel of living together, but at the same time, they do want to have their own bedroom, they do want to have their own bathroom, they don't want to share bathrooms, they don't want to do all these things. So how do you accommodate these things? And this is what we're trying to do with some architects back home. We see, and I mean, there's a lot of talk about this mobility in Europe, and people are studying much more abroad and so forth. I think we shouldn't forget the local students, because they are still the biggest part of the users. Yes, there's a lot of people taking 6 months abroad and then go back, so 1 term, and then they go back. Some people may take two terms, but they go back. It's actually those we need to accommodate are the people from that country, because they're the ones who are going to stay longer. And all of us would prefer that the students stay for a year, 2 years in our accommodation, so we don't have the wear and tear of them moving in and out all the time. Now, I also agree that we want them to keep in that area. But I do think mixing, you know, a family with 2 small children with a lot of students just above or below is probably not the best thing. At least we found that out. But Danes, yeah. Swedes,
Babies can
Finns.
be really noisy. I know that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think it's something, because we don't want our other tenants to move in and out because of all these things. So we need to have the right mix. And what we can do is have one building for students and another building or a few buildings aside for the others, so they can stay in that and we can move them around, but we don't mix them in the same buildings.
Okay, we do. Because we apply a wider focus. You know, we were talking about affordability on residential. And if you take a look at the mismatch in some of the residential markets, we find it very difficult to favor student housing in that respect. It's not what the discussion and the dialogue is with the municipalities. They want to solve the housing problem because they have this inflow of people coming into the city, and not just students, they're young workers, families, elderly people. And if you take a look at the dispensable income of most of those groups, you cannot expect that to rise abundantly in the upcoming decades, actually. So we're looking at affordability as a percentage of the dispensable income. And we're trying to build and create residential units which are fit for several target groups and fit their dispensable income. That's the best way to solve issues in the marketplace, but also to create viable cities. And that's the dialogue with the municipality. Otherwise I can get a ground lease anywhere.
Horst, do you want to pick that up? And then I want to come to questions.
Yeah.
So if anybody's got a question, pop your hand up in a minute and I'll make sure we come to all of them. Yeah.
Rikke, I want to invite you to be guided through Rainer and me through our houses. Your view on students are being treated or treating the property they are living in is really remembering me to what I've heard 5 years ago.
No. I'm not saying they're ruining it, but people moving in and out does do wear and tear.
When I tried to get debt in place, and I had to discuss with bankers, and when I started the business with my wife, she told me, look into the rooms of our kids, and you want to house them.
No. Listen, I'm not saying they're treating the I'm not saying they're treating the buildings wrong. But we all know when we have a huge churn on the people.
We do have each year.
So it has to do with simple churn. It has nothing to do with.
We manage this all the time. We are specialists. We are not investing in all asset classes, but we are doing what we know to do, specialists. So the experience with my kids before you get the micros to ask some additional question was some of that what we try to educate. That was really amazing when we visited first our oldest son studying law in Münster. We had to get out our shoes because he had cleaned. And whenever they are coming back to Hotel Mama, it's the same as it was years before. But in their own environment, they are behaving different. And our philosophy is give them a really well-fitted, furnished apartment. They will treat it different as it is worn up, and nobody has to take care of that. The rest is managing your house and your community.
If somebody's got a question, please raise your hands, and then we've got a microphone there to come to you if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask.
My question to the panel would be if any of you have heard of co-living and what role, if any, it plays in your future plans over the next 5 to 10 years.
We call it a French concept. So you have your separate bedrooms, which might be useful, and you have a shared living room, and it makes it more affordable. So whether you be a student or two young people sharing that accommodation, that's fine. There's also amenities in the adjacent building, that's done.
Okay, good. Any others? Yeah, there's one here, and then I'll come to you, yeah.
Hi, my name is Thomas. I'm a developer of student housing in the Baltics. And my question is to all of you, I guess, can you say pros and cons of leasing to universities versus directly to students?
It's actually about leases as well. I wanted to ask, how do you cope with the, let's say, fitting the whole year with the lease of for students, whether you price in the potential vacancy during the summer, or you do somehow else.
So yes, how do we price for that gap?
Very briefly, it really depends on which type of investor you have and where that fits into a portfolio. When we started investing in student housing in the UK, we essentially went master lease because there was a pretty hefty yield premium. So we had a 20-year lease to, say, the University of Cambridge. At the time, you would marvel today at what the yield was. And that was a highly secure, super secure long-term investment, fit very well with liability matching. You have to remember, we're talking about pension funds and insurance groups that are the funders here. And then as the yield compressed, we went into direct let, and it's a bit more challenging because you have to deal with the second question, which is shorter leases, and the master lease covers everything for the whole year. So we underwrote, is it 42 weeks, is it something else, is it 50, is it 48? That's what we priced it differently, and then you ask this yield premium to compensate you for that risk, because as I said, accidents do happen. Some universities may lose their ranking, or tuition fees may increase, or maybe not in the case of Denmark, but some students may have it maybe more challenging. There's a lot of press today, for example, in the UK, about is it worth it to get that master's degree, right? So if that gets into the minds of individuals, then suddenly your demand, your occupancy rate of 99 gets to 80. And if it's 80, the return profile is very different for an investor. And then suddenly the whole asset class is under pressure. So it has benchmarks, but it doesn't have a track record yet.
And also, I think there's a good point there about the UK, which is certainly students my children's generation at the moment who are looking at that, one who has gone through, but the one who hasn't gone through yet and could do is probably not going to go, just because doesn't think it's worthwhile, would rather work. Doesn't think they're going to get much from it, from certainly a lot of so being very critical about which universities they're looking at and just deciding, well, actually a degree from there is not worth the 50,000 it's going to cost me to get it. So that is quite an interesting point. Are there any other, yes, one question there.
Hi, as a designer, is there a key point of making your product stand out? So, with all the development, with all the money that you need to make and all of that, there's so many developments out there in terms of the student housing. Do you have to focus on the design as well? Or you guys as a, investor, do you care about design or that's like a secondary?
We definitely do care about design, starting from how we design the brand, how we translate the brand into interiors, and on the interior side you need to distinguish between your communal areas, which are more or less the heart of the success of your scheme, and also the rooms. And on the rooms you need to take into consideration what are, let's say, the requirements of the students. So for example, most of the German students require a full-fledged desk where they can work on. So for example, in the Netherlands you find schemes with desks where you just can put 2 books on. And so there is, they do all electronically. No, but again here you have a situation, there is no one-fits-all product. But what we see is if you go back 5 years, the demand-supply ratio was so imbalanced that you could rent out every type of shit. And today you see in some of the cities competition arising. Young people have the choice between 3, 4, 5 products, and then they make their own assessment out of a combination of what do you get for my rent, what is the offer, what is the micro-location, what is the infrastructure, and then make their choice. So that leads to a situation that some already also in Germany start struggling with occupancies. And I think that will be everywhere in Europe the case, also the UK. You see occupancy or voids becoming more and more of an issue, and you need to balance between how do I design my product or do I blindly run into this race for amenity, which then leads to operational costs which kill your economics.
We're coming up to the end of our time, so brief. Yes, I know there's 3 of you want to reply. So.
On your point, take into account ESG and sustainability, because the municipalities will force you to have a zero type of property. So an outstanding certification on your carbon dioxide, on your use of energy, otherwise you won't be able to build it.
Horst,
This time I agree with you, Rainer. So to make clear what learning curve, we as being 5, 6, 7 years in the business in Germany have done. The first schemes, they got the brand designed by Philipp Stark, and some old people like us got the meaning, this is a selling point, and we try to come into dialogue with the young generation, as mentioned before. So the philosophy in our houses is you have to see that there's design. The individual studio inventory shouldn't dominate the tenant, the customer. The communal area, they should support everything which means community is taking place, can take place whenever you want. And that means the individual is giving, it's integrating himself into a wider frame, and when the individual is closing the door, the individual is at home in his privacy atmosphere. And that has to be, let's say, mirrored in the way you are furnishing, you are inventorying, you are designing the product at the end.
You want us to come in quickly, and you want us to come in quickly,
Yeah, first of all, we include, of course, vacancy. We have vacancy percentages, though when we look at the local students, they tend to keep actually their lease throughout the term, and then they work in the summer holidays or they rent it to somebody else, so they sublet it. So we have a churn in there. With regards to the cost and the design, we have different kind of structures, how we do it. Some are big dormitories where you have hallways, and then everybody has a little room, and then you share the living space at the end and the kitchen. Others have small sort of apartments, studios of 30 square meters where they have their own bathroom and kitchenette. So it depends. What we see is in demand is more these type of villas where you then have your own sort of room, so it gets the feel of family still. Now the issue here is for us whether we rent the whole thing out to a university and they take care of it, or we rent it out as single units and then you have leases, because that's where you come into the wear and tear. It has nothing to do with these guys actually ruining stuff, but there are some laws, and here's the cultural thing. We have to deliver. If we give a new lease contract to somebody, according to the Danish lease law, you have to then repaint the walls and make sure everything is fine. So the more churn you have, the more cost you have of making sure that everything looks the same, because you can't deliver it with holes in the walls where you just put up a picture. You have to take that out and you have to paint it again. So that's where it comes in for us.
And you wanted to pick it up quickly.
No, very quickly. I think the design is critical, because the design of this is real estate. So both the look of the building as well as the interior are part of the brand and the reputation. And we're in March today, you're now, and we're looking at what's the ratio of pre-leasing of our schemes in the portfolio. And the word of mouth is important, particularly for internationally mobile students. They actually speak and they have internet, there are blogs, this is part of the culture and generation. So if you can bring, enhance your branding and your reputation of your scheme through, design and other aspects, it's key.
Good, thank you. I want to leave a little bit of time just for networking and asking any private questions you've got. But I do want to just ask one last question, which is focused on investment, because there's a lot of investors here. And a researcher. So starting with you, Samuel, from the research that you're doing or what you've heard, where would you invest? Quickly, you've got to choose one location now, and then we'll move all the way down. Samuel, where should these good people invest?
That's probably even more difficult question for me than for the particular investor, because they have a strategy and there is a location to fit the strategy. And so I will be a bit diplomatic but accurate, and I would connect with what Rainer said. When it comes to continental Europe, there are city markets, not necessarily country markets or pan-European market. So the product needs to fit the particular target audience in that particular city. Should there be a match, which is now easy to find through the transparency of the asset class, then that's the best location. Am I diplomatic enough?
Good. Rikke?
Well, if we forget the Nordics for a second and just look at Europe, I would go in and analyze every country and say, what's the major universities? Then I would understand the culture in that country, and then I will invest there.
Okay.
How much money to spend?
How much do you want?
At least 500 million.
500 million, and I'll also add leverage, so you can go beyond that.
Some modest leverage in there.
We can lend if you're interested.
Okay, well, let's talk. I would spend it on those cities. It would be primarily a city focus. Those cities with well-established universities and with this mismatch in the residential market, and I would develop multi-generation buildings. And that could be Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, of course.
You'd obviously need Rikke as an advisor.
The Nordics, but I probably stay away from the southern part.
Okay. Mahdi.
Well, it's a great question. 500 million, unfortunately, I think is too small for even with leverage for a pan-European fund. I think I agree with that. There's no single market or single as our colleagues in the States have a continent to invest in. But clearly, we already have a pretty big exposure in the UK, as you know. Continental Europe, I would stick to the best universities, those that will offer an increasing proportion of English-taught courses to attract international mobile students. I would also stick to cities where rents are expensive, so students find it difficult to find flats, even if they share the flats. And so I would really stick to the likes of Munich, Berlin, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, Amsterdam, obviously. And I would prices are expensive, but if you're going to pay today in today's market, stick to the best locations.
Horst, how much money do you have now? More than 500 million, I suppose. Go on. Anyway, go on.
No, we have, as some of you know, together with Allianz and big Dutch institutional, an existing fund which is now invested around 400 million in that asset class, mainly in Germany, but a bit in Vienna as well. We have two funds in the Netherlands. One is totally invested. Amsterdam student schemes, and we have a mixed one, students and young professionals, which is now going to be filled up. And yeah, with our new shareholder, we want to build up a portfolio of 1.5 to 2.0 billion on balance sheet. That in let's say in a strategy, as I mentioned before, mainly in Germany, but in interesting international cities, as I named some of them, and we are looking around our borders. So it's not only geography, it's economy as well. If you have to pass two borders to come to your next destination, it's a bit more cost incentive and difficult as to cross only one border to be there. Yeah? From Hamburg to Copenhagen, it's not far. Yeah? And from Munich to northern Italy, it's not far. Or to Switzerland from Freiburg in the southwest. That's how we look on that. And then, of course, the fundamentals in all these cities have to work in terms of normal real estate business figures.
Rainer.
Yeah, in principle, we love immature markets. That's what brought us into Portugal some 18 months ago. If you look at the European landscape, that excludes then the Netherlands, excludes France, excludes the UK, but brings you to a certain extent into Italy, where there's still huge potential. It brings you in the CEE. But we're not city pickers. Compared to Horst, so Hungary is more or less only Budapest, and in Czech Republic besides Prague. Can you give me 5 other interesting cities there?
There are, but not for our profile.
Yeah, and not for international investors. Yeah, hard to spell, yeah, and hard to find.
No, as soon as we are getting domestic, we can talk about. But when we go there, we pick this city which is self-explaining.
Yeah. And another aspect, I think, is a little bit out of the box, especially when you talk about Iberia or Spain. Yeah, there are some islands who host universities. In Las Palmas, you have 28,000 students. On Mallorca Island, you have 24,000 students. Tenerife has 26. And surprisingly, 80% are not from the island. Yeah. And they have to stay anywhere.
I will inscribe at that university.
Yeah. And we had that point on summer occupancy earlier. I think in those places, your last issue is summer occupancy. Yeah. And that's something we're looking into.
If you could join me in thanking both yourselves and the speakers, that would be great. Thank you, everybody.